Holy City Center Radio is episode 296, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, September 25th, 2024. Happy anniversary to my parents. They are celebrating it today, the 25th of September. They have been married, I don't know how many years, but they've been together since they were, I believe, juniors in high school, and then got married a handful of years after school and been together ever since, which is pretty incredible. So congrats to them. Love you both. Very happy for you, and we'll be thinking about you many times throughout the day. Also, a happy birthday, belated on the podcast, although I already FaceTimed him. But my nephew Chase celebrated his birthday on Monday of this week. 12 years old. Can't believe it. Seventh grader. Just a great kid. Super smart. He's silly. He has a really kind heart. And just a sweet kid, just a good all-around kid. Sister Cameron's not too bad herself, but it wasn't her birthday, so she'll have to wait a few months before I can give her some extra praise on the podcast. So a very nice week for my family between the anniversary and the birthday. So that's it's been a little nice for me. There's one part that wasn't so nice to me, unrelated to my family, which will explain why there was no podcast on Friday. Before I dive into that, the reason there was no podcast on Sunday, well, technically bad planning on my part. I thought I'd have time, and I didn't. I went to go to an event at the Gilliard during the afternoon. It was a discussion about their new cookbook. It's Stephen Colbert, of course, a longtime resident of the Charleston area. He grew up on James Island, and his wife, Evie McGee Colbert, who also grew up, she actually grew up in downtown Charleston. Of course, Stephen has gone on to, you've seen him in many things, but of course, The Late Show is what he's hosting right now. He took over for Letterman, and his wife has appeared several times on that show, especially during the pandemic when they were, broadcasting from their home on Sullivan's Island, because they weren't in the studio in New York. So you may be familiar with her as well. Well, the couple has released a cookbook called Does This Taste Funny? It's a bunch of recipes that the family made together. It was kind of born out of the pandemic as well. And they detail that in the book. So they had an event at the Gilliard that was hosted, quote unquote, by Busy Phillips, the actor, author, and social media star. You may remember from all sorts of different shows, including Cougar Town, Freaks and Geeks, which is one of my personal favorites and the first time I ever saw her in something, and most recently in Girls 5 Eva. And also, she is a big fan of Charleston. If you follow her on social media, she is here quite often. I believe her love affair with the area started when she appeared in Danny McBride's Vice Principals, which was filmed in this area, and she just keeps coming back, constantly posting about some of her favorite clothing spots and restaurants, and so it was a perfect fit for the event. The event was just a little over an hour, so everybody got a signed cookbook who bought tickets, which was cool. So that was I didn't realize that, I don't think, when I bought the tickets. So that was nice, and the conversation was fun, lighthearted. Shared stories about growing up in Charleston. Of course, they talked about the cookbook, where the recipes came from, the development of it. And it was just fun because you had two people who know the area very, very well. They grew up here. They still have a home here. And of course, Busy Phillips, who has become a fan over the last handful of years. So you have this mix of like old school Charleston with, someone who visits every summer, basically, if not more than that. And so it was a nice mix to hear what they had to talk about. So in any event, that went, I assumed the event was going to be about an hour-ish, but it just, by the time I got back home and, was thinking about the podcast, I had other work to do as well. And, unfortunately, I was just like, you know what, I got to do this other stuff. So my fault on that. But you can't blame me for Friday. And this is just a ridiculous story, which is why I'm sharing it. So on Friday, I had left my home. Or I'm sorry, on Thursday, I left my home to go to an office that the company I work for, that Holy City Center is under. We have an office space downtown. I went there to do work. I also had to deliver papers. Yes, those two newspapers I talk about That is, when Holy City Center went under this new parent company, a few months in, they asked if I would be an assistant publisher, help edit and put together these papers that come out twice a month for the Sea Islands, Sullivan's, Isle of Palms, Kiowa, Seabrook, etc. And I actually have had to go deliver them to, they're just like some paper boxes. It's not like I'm delivering them to everyone's homes. The post office does that. But there are some, those like newspaper racks or those like, newspaper boxes that it's like are metal and you pull it down and pull out your issue. The issues are free, by the way, so you don't have to pay for them. If you see one of those boxes, grab them. So I do deliver those sometimes, and so pretty busy day. I'm out of my house, and that was fine because I have a cleaning service that I use. It comes in, and this was their day to come in, and so they don't really want you to be there, and I don't really want to be in my home when they're cleaning. So I get a message from them saying, "Hey, a cleaner." I get a message from like the company itself. They say, "Hey, the cleaner at your house says you don't have any water. Is there any way for you to turn it on?" Unfortunately, there wasn't. My complex was going to be without water for anywhere from like a couple hours, if that, to several, because someone in my complex was having some plumbing done, and they had to turn off the water to the entire complex that I live in. And so I said, no, I'm sorry. They kind of let us know last minute about this thing. And I didn't have a chance to let you all know that might be the case. Cause the other part was I didn't know when they were going to get here. I also didn't know when the water was going to be turned off. They gave an estimate, but it's gone every which way when these things have happened before. And so they were like, all right, so we obviously didn't plan on that. We'll do our best to clean. And I said, yeah, absolutely, no problem. I'm not expecting you to mop the floors if you can't get any water or anything. Just do the other normal stuff. So I get home, and to the cleaner's credit, she did a great job. Better than I have. They tend to have like the same people come week after week. They're just familiar with your home. They have a schedule or whatever. Well, I had a different person these last couple times, and I thought she actually did a really great job, better than the last person had done. So I was happy about that, but it took a while to realize that because when I got home, I opened the door, smells clean, looks clean, but 2 feet within the door, I hear running water, and it's coming from my upstairs bathroom. And I go, oh no, why is there water running? There's nobody in my house. I have an alarm system and everything. So I knew no one was there. I knew the cleaner had already left. And I go, oh, what is happening? And so I run upstairs. There are three possible water sources in my bathroom, and all three were running. One was the sink, one was the shower, which the shower head was cocked a little bit. So not a lot, but a little water was spraying out of the shower and onto my bathroom floor, which, by the way, was now flooded. But the main culprit, and this is why the story makes it funny, even though this is a whole annoying thing. I have a bidet. Yes, not a super fancy one, just one of those ones that you can buy through like Amazon or, one of the ones advertised through podcasts. I forget where exactly I got it. It was a pandemic purchase. By the way, amazing purchase. We all should be using bidets in this country, and it's kind of gross that we don't. That's just a soapbox and a hill I'm willing to die on, but we'll get into that later in another episode, perhaps. But the bidet is spraying water out of my toilet, just straight out of it. I think the lid was closed, so it actually wasn't spraying out like against the wall, which that little that little spray could definitely hit the wall across from the toilet, but was just hitting the top of the toilet and obviously eventually overflowed. And so I've got a flooded bathroom. So of course I'm cussing and I'm like chuckling to myself. This is so silly. Getting towels. I've turned off all the water, but then I could still kind of hear water coming from downstairs. And that's when I realized, oh no, it had been flooded for so long that some of the water must have leaked out of the bathroom and, it is now going through the floor into the ceiling, which had happened to me years ago in a different scenario, not involving a bidet. Um, and sure enough, I go downstairs and there's water dripping out of the ceiling in multiple spots. There was one spot that was really, really bad. So somehow all the water was kind of puddling there. And if you've ever had this problem, it's not fun. So I was a little upset about that. My day on Thursday went from, pretty good. I'd gotten up early. I'd gotten a lot of work done and to just a disaster. So I could kind of chuckle about it because it's silly. So what must have happened is the cleaner realized there was no water, but maybe was checking it periodically, or thought, oh, I'll just leave this going, and when if the water kicks on, I will, great, I'll use it and finish up cleaning. And she must have left before the water came back on, and sure enough, when it did, all these things were going. Now, sink running, even the shower with a little bit of water kind of spraying out wouldn't have been that big of a deal. It's the bidet that was the real problem. And my only guess is when she was cleaning, she hit the lever that you pull up when you want the water to spray, and didn't realize what it was, what it did. Obviously, because the water was off, so she had no idea, and so that must be what happened. So to finish up this long story, I called the company, told them what happened. I tried to make it clear, like, look, this is an honest mistake. Obviously, I don't think, I was trying to basically be like, please don't let this poor person get in any big trouble. Like, this is a place that they haven't been to often. It's not the regular person who's here. They might not know things like I have a bidet and how that works. And, the water was off. So something that she would have found out pretty quickly when she lifted that lever. Um, she just didn't. And it was just, again, I didn't want her to get in any trouble. But obviously something needs to be done. And so far they've been great, refunding me for the cleaning, and have offered to contact a company that's going to come in and look at what happened, and then, go ahead and fix it, and then they're going to pay for it. So we'll see if that all transpires. So far, so good. They have apologized. So, when things go wrong, yeah, this sucks. It sucks looking at my ceiling right now and not knowing how many more days before it's all going to be situated, but hopefully it'll all be taken care of. So, all of that was a funny story because of what it involves, even though it's a kind of crappy story, no pun intended, since it involves a bathroom. Um, and I wanted to share why there was no show on Friday, because I had plenty of time to do one up until that moment and was planning on it. So that's what it is. So that's all my drama that happened last week. We will now get through the latest news updates as quickly as I can, but not missing any important info, because there's a lot of important stories that happened during this 2-episode break. So no further delays. Let's get into it. As expected, last Friday, South Carolina went through with the state's first execution in 13 years. We've talked about this ad nauseum over the last 2-3 years since I started the podcast, I think, as it's come up. And by now, you probably are all well versed in why it's been 13 years, and probably remember the legal challenges that came up when lethal injection drugs were not available, and how South Carolina added a firing squad to their offerings, as it were, which now that they get lethal injection drugs, they have three. Any inmate who is sentenced to death has to choose one of the three. So it's the firing squad, the electric chair, or lethal injection. The inmate, Freddie Owens, had his lawyer pick lethal injection. They had a bunch of appeals and they were all denied. There was one that was really had made me think there could have been a chance, but ultimately all were denied. And Owens died on Friday, about, I think it was 10 minutes or so after the lethal injection drug cocktail was first injected. So, for some background, Owens was convicted of the 1997 killing of a Greenville convenience store clerk during a robbery. He was 19 at the time. When he was on trial, he then killed a person that was incarcerated at a county jail. They happened to be put in the same room, and he ultimately killed him. His confession to that attack, the one in the jail, was read to two different juries and a judge who all sentenced him to death. So I want to keep in mind that's the background we're talking about here. Regardless of if he did or didn't actually kill the convenience store clerk, which we'll get into in a moment, he did admit to killing someone in prison, and there does not seem to be any doubt about that. So when we're talking about these things, there may be points where it sounds like I'm trying to make him seem like a sympathetic figure, and I promise I'm not. I just have, as I've gotten older, my feelings on the death penalty have, significantly changed. And so even though I don't, and this, look, not a hill I'm willing to, go to battle on or die on, but certainly, and it's not my priority as far as politics and things. I just am not a big fan of states just killing people, regardless of what they've done. So this is not to say there aren't horrible people who have done horrible things, and it's hard to have sympathy for them in these circumstances. And I totally get that. I don't really have sympathy for him. So, but I just wanted to put that out there. Despite my beliefs, it doesn't mean I have sympathy when these things happen. It's a tough thing that I've been thinking about for several years now. So I just wanted to put that out there just for background. So, in any event, um, I won't get into too many details of the actual execution. You can visit the link in the show notes if you want more. It seems to have gone how they think it would. There's sometimes concerns about lethal injection and really any method, something going wrong or it being more painful than it's claimed to be, as far as being considered cruel and unusual punishment. It didn't seem anything out of the ordinary happened. Um, he decided not to give any kind of final statement or anything, but he did say goodbye to his lawyer. He just said the word bye to his lawyer. She said bye back to him. And then a little bit after that, he ultimately passes. As I mentioned, all his last ditch appeals were repeatedly denied, and they range from all sorts of places. There was one that came from a federal court on the morning of the execution. He had also petitioned for a stay of execution from the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, when that was made known, Governor Henry McMaster and a corrections director here in South Carolina quickly filed a reply, and they were urging the Supreme Court to reject Owen's petition. They did ultimately deny the request. They did so shortly after the scheduled start time of his execution, which didn't start exactly at 6 p.m. like it was supposed to. So if they had ruled to halt it, it could have been stopped. His absolute last chance, though, would have been in the hands of Republican South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster, who I just mentioned. No surprise he denied it, considering he asked the Supreme Court to deny it. So that shouldn't surprise anybody. And the fact that he has been pushing for this for years, trying to get the state back to executing people. So no surprise he was not granting Owens clemency. Now, there's all sorts of different appeals and lawsuits and stuff that have to do with the death penalty itself. But the one appeal that I thought maybe would at least delay it was that a friend of Owens provided a sworn statement and testified that uh, he had lied to save himself back in 1997, 98, whenever the trial actually happened. He lied about the whole thing, now feels bad and says Owens wasn't even there and doesn't deserve to die. However, just because he lied to save himself from the death penalty, prison officials and everybody else, as I just mentioned, decided it wasn't compelling enough to halt the execution, let alone, even if it was temporary. But I found that interesting. Now, could this person be lying? Of course. It seems they believe that he's lying. But I thought for a moment there may be at least a delay where they kind of looked into this, but nope, did even get more than a couple days before, the rulings all came in. So that is the update to the story we've been talking about a while. There will now be, I think they ultimately decided on something like 35 days in between executions, but they're going to just keep going with those. So the state's back in the business of killing inmates. And it doesn't appear there's going to be any stops to legal challenges as far as constitutionality. And inmates' only hopes at this point would be if something comes up that shows that, hey, maybe this guilty verdict isn't accurate. But even then, it have to be pretty compelling, because a sworn statement from someone saying, hey, I lied to get myself out of trouble, he wasn't there, wasn't enough to move them here. So we'll see what happens moving forward, but it doesn't appear there'll be any stopping the state at this point. Another update, you may remember that State Representative Marvin Pendarvis, a Democrat in Charleston, was facing some potential legal trouble, and he has ultimately decided to resign from the State House of Representatives. This is according to Speaker Muriel Smith's office. Now, um, since that announcement, Pendarvis's name has been removed from the State House website. Even though he's a current state rep, he was running for reelection, and he actually didn't have any general election challengers. So now this will trigger a special election of some kind. I don't have the details on what that will be yet. Pendarvis, who is 35, was suspended from the bar by the South Carolina Supreme Court after he was accused in a lawsuit of legal malpractice and of committing unfair and deceptive practices under the South Carolina Unfair Trade Practices Act. Specifically, the lawsuit, which was filed in April by attorneys Eric Bland and Ronnie Richter, on behalf of their client, Adrian Lewis, who was a former client of Pendarvis's. They had claims that Pendarvis had forged Lewis's signature in order to secure a settlement for an amount that was far smaller than was promised. So basically, Lewis is claiming he was told, hey, we're going to have a settlement for this amount. Settlement comes in and it's actually less than that. But in addition to that, Lewis says his signature was forged in order to make this happen. So, with these serious accusations, he'll have his day in court, of course, innocent until proven guilty. But a lot of people are wondering if he should resign. A lot of people said he should, and he ultimately made that decision. Part of his statement said that the residents of his district, which is 113, deserve a representative who can devote full time to their needs, and I cannot do that at this time. So he didn't take any responsibility, didn't admit to any wrongdoing. If you were wondering if that happened, basically, that was the gist of it, and the typical lines of it's been the honor of my lifetime to serve, et cetera, et cetera. So no new developments as far as the case is concerned, but yes, he has dropped out. And so that means we'll have a new representative for that district, but there hasn't really been anything solid about what exactly is going to happen as far as that race and who may run. But obviously I'll provide you updates as they come in. Another update, this one involves the police officer and a Park Circle resident who shot and killed a well known Lowcountry musician this summer. It was ruled that they will not face any sort of prosecution. This is according to a letter that was obtained by the Post and Courier, and this comes from their reporting on that. So SLED, the state law enforcement division, uh, anytime there's an officer involved shooting, they're the ones who investigate. They were looking into this June 28th event that ultimately resulted in Quentin Ravenel, who was 34 years old at the time, dying from gunshot wounds. You may remember this story. It's really bizarre. There's so many questions still about this situation. But ultimately, Ninth Circuit Solicitor Scarlett Wilson last week wrote to SLED that she would not pursue charges against the North Charleston police officer whose name is Adrian Bessinkan, or the unidentified Alpha Street resident. So neither are going to face any charges. According to police reports and the witness, and actually a couple witnesses, although there's been some conflicting information and some witnesses said, like, gave some wrong info, but basically they all kind of said the same thing, which is that Ravenel was apparently behaving erratically that evening. Some think he was experiencing some sort of crisis. Even Wilson thinks it was some kind of psychotic break, but he was having some kind of issue, and it led to a whole lot of chaos. And ultimately, according to police reports, Ravenel ended up being accused of attacking a police officer, of trying to grab that officer's gun, and then trying to force himself into someone's home. It was later found out that he had been staying at that home, but it wasn't his, just somewhere he had been staying. As he tried to enter the home, the officer and the resident both shot Ravenel. His adoptive mother claimed that he was shot 8 times, and that's what she told the Post and Courier. So Wilson made this determination that there would be no charges because of South Carolina's stand your ground laws. And ultimately, SLED's investigating agent agreed with her, so there will be no charges. So, as a number one, stand your ground. For those who don't know, there's excuse me, there are a lot of states. No surprise, most of them are states that are very gun friendly. Read, into that what you will. Where basically, if someone enters your home, you basically have carte blanche to harm them in any way. Obviously, I'm exaggerating a little, but if someone is trying to enter your home, you are either telling them not to, or they're or breaking into your home, like, but if someone were to knock on your door, say, and they say, "Hey, I want to come in," you say, "No, I don't want you in. You're not allowed to come in." And they do. If you're fearing for your safety in any way, you can shoot that person. It has gotten a lot of people in many states out of charges in some very shady circumstances. Now, that is not to say I know any more details in this situation, but there's a lot of questions. What exactly was happening with Ravenel? We'll probably never know. Was this warranted? Yeah, I mean, I guess would stand your ground. Like I said, it's pretty easy to just be like, "Yep, stand your ground," and there's really not much that will change that. Um, but I think it makes there should be questions about that law if you already didn't have them. And also, we go back to now. Granted, this was a police officer and the resident, but there's those talks of who should respond to circumstances where someone's acting erratically, or having some kind of psychotic issue. Should it be just the police as it normally is, or like as other places have implemented, someone else who's more well versed in dealing with someone who's having a psychotic issue or a break or any kind of mental health issue at all. So a lot of questions, no answers, but no charges will be filed, is the ultimate headline from this very sad story. So let's end with some fun stories. This next one's fun. The one after that is just funny, but not because of the bigger story, but you'll understand what I mean. I think I mentioned this on the last episode. Do you remember we had that run of like random animals that were just like fleeing their owners? And, the monkey in Walterboro was the biggest story. I think there was like a llama a week after that. Well, after a little hiatus, we did have another story last week, and this one involving a kangaroo. Yes, a kangaroo went on an adventure out in Hardyville, including stopping at a shop for a little while, just hanging out outside before the owners of the kangaroo came and picked it up. The business, Palmetto Wholesale Cars, they were able to actually catch the kangaroo. They had some photos and some videos, and you can see it in the link in the show notes. So basically, somebody in that area who lives nearby the business, they own this kangaroo. Kangaroo got out. They found him or her, and it didn't specify. And you know, were able to grab it, whatever, get it back to their home. So just another weird animal thing. This one was not a multi-day chase like the monkey escapade was, but still really weird to see that headline. For those wondering, yes, in the state of South Carolina, you can own a kangaroo. Now, there is a caveat to that. Certain municipalities can ban them. So even though the state's like, yeah, it's cool. However, if your particular municipality says no, you have to go along with their ruling on that. But yes, technically, just about anybody in South Carolina can own one, because, of course. And to just kind of show how silly that is, there's only two other states that joined South Carolina in that, West Virginia and Wisconsin being the other two. So glad this one ended safely for all involved. No one injured. The kangaroo not injured. Definitely a better ending than that poor monkey story. But what's next? What wild animal? Because in South Carolina, you can own just about anything. What animal's next that's going to get out? And our final story, we've talked about book bans. Some people don't want to call them book bans, but we've talked about that going on in the state. I'm not going to rehash all of it. But the crux of the book ban, as we know, is sexual content. That has been what people who want to remove books from, whether it's school libraries or public libraries, or force libraries to drastically change policies, or whatever. It all comes down to sexual content being available to children. And people who are opposed to this aren't necessarily, well, I would hope, are not opposed to some of these books that they've been talking about being banned. They're more concerned about the broad language and all of these book banning legislations that are passing across the country. It's so vague that just about anything could potentially be removed from libraries. So it's not so much that they want sexual content in schools. It's just, there's a big difference between, a graphic step by step instruction on how to do something sexual versus a passing reference to people, in whatever book, and we'll talk about some examples, a passing reference to, two characters in a book having sex. That's a pretty big difference. And depending on a student's age, parents may think, yeah, that's fine. So that's what we're talking about here. And the Post and Courier, their editorial team looked into this book ban, and they realized that, yeah, this language is vague and this could lead to a lot of unintended consequences. So now that they've looked a little bit more closely at the rules that took effect on August 1st, the editorial board says they've become concerned. And their concern isn't that the regulation is unclear, it's that at least parts of it are quite clear and quite broad, as they say. So the biggest thing that is, has them concerned is how exactly the Board of Ed here is going to enforce its regulation as written. If so, it could lead to the banning of a lot of things that were probably unintended, or if it will treat it as though it means what most people would assume it means if they read only the regulation and not the sweeping definition in the state law that it incorporates by reference but doesn't quote. And I'm going to get into more details on that because I know that's a little confusing the way they worded that. So there's a regulation that prohibits any textbooks, library books, or other materials that include, quote, descriptions or visual depictions of sexual contact as that term is defined by section 16-15-305C1. So there is that, as you could tell, descriptions or visual depictions of sexual content is extraordinarily vague. And then when you look at the term as it's defined, it's also vague. And so teachers have been asking what may seem like ridiculous questions that were designed just to make a point, but they, under how the law is written, because it's so broad and vague, they're actually kind of legitimate questions. So for instance, can they still teach anything involving any of the works of William Shakespeare? Can they even include them in their libraries? Some stuff they're not going to teach, but is okay to be in the library. Can they even do that? What about the Bible? They ask. Can it be available in the library? Well, the Post and Courier says by their reading, the answers to those questions would be no. And as they put it, that's ridiculous because obviously that wasn't their intent. But when you make something so broad, and make no mistake, that was done on purpose, because as we've talked about, the real issue here is LGBTQ related materials. Yes, I'm sure there are libraries that had a book or two that were inappropriate for children as far as having graphic depictions of sex or sexual content. Excuse me. It's the end of the show. But the reason they keep it vague is so that some parent who's up in arms trying to say that the school's trying to groom their children or whatever can get a book that has a very just a passing reference to a sexual act, nothing graphic, nothing crazy, that they could get it banned simply because it's related to LGBTQ. And even though that exact same type of description or sentence or whatever could be in a work by Shakespeare or even in the Bible, they wouldn't press for those works to be banned. So, yes, this could go either way depending on how the Department of Education wants to do this. They can either do the thing, the common sense thing, which is no, this was supposed to be about graphic sexual content and material that's inappropriate for certain ages. It's not supposed to be like if any book mentions sex or sexual content in any way, has to be removed from the library. So the Post and Courier gives some suggestions, like you wouldn't treat a 400-page young adult novel that's in the high school library that includes just say a one paragraph description of a young couple engaging in what they say is heavy petting, or on the more serious side, if there's a book that talks about a young girl, say, being sexually assaulted, you're not going to treat those the same as some of the extreme examples that people have said, the depictions of sex in these books and what have you. Like, there's a big difference, obviously. And I think even the biggest proponents of this book ban, when they hear the Bible could be banned, they'd be like, oh, no, we didn't mean that, obviously. So if there's a description in the Bible that is similar in another book, neither should be banned. So in any event, also the Post and Courier went on to say that even biology textbooks could be dicey if they discuss, say, animal reproduction. Doesn't specify that the sexual content has to be only in like a entertainment book. If it's biology and it's saying how animals reproduce in a completely academic way, that could be banned. So this is exactly the kind of thing we talked about leading up to it. It's going to be vague. Then we saw it was vague, and we knew exactly why that was. But look, if people are going to play that game and the Board of Education goes along with it, the game could be played right back. And all the things that they didn't intend to get banned can very easily get banned if they have similar content to books that are. So something to keep an eye on, something we kind of knew was coming. But I hats off to the Post and Courier for actually like doing a little bit of a deep dive on this and trying to see for sure, like, is this as vague as people are saying? And yeah, they realized it was. So we'll see what happens there. That'll do it for this extra large edition of Holy City Center Radio. Apologies for not having a show on Friday or Monday. I went through all that at the beginning. Now you know why. And now you also know why this episode's a little longer than normal. But I've got you caught up on some of the biggest stories, barring any bidet disasters or anything else. I should be back with an episode on Friday, and I sure hope so. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show as well. Have a great rest of your week. If you need plans, holycitycenter.com/calendar is your place to go. Remove the calendar portion. Just go right to the homepage for the latest stories and information about what is happening here in Charleston. As I said, fingers crossed. Friday, I'll be back, barring anything ridiculous. But in any event, I'll be back at some point. And when that time happens, I'll be very excited to speak with you. But until then, good night and good luck.